Hello, Dan.
How you doing,
How you doing?
Mearl?
Well, good. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Murphy's Creek Brewery, and meet the proprietor, Dan Ayala. Dan, a little bit of difference going from the accounting business into the brewing business, huh?
Well, that's true, but
Now, it isn't true, though, that you did it just because you love to drink beer, is it?
no.
No.
I didn't.
Okay. What was your plan? What motivated you to decide to get into the brewing business?
Well, I am in the business industry anyway.
Sure,
You know, I work
sure.
for Von Tribble.
Sure.
But just in looking around at various industries, a friend of mine who works at Stephen O. Winery had mentioned that the microbreweries and brew pubs are really taking off, and that one would be good in Murphy's. So I started looking into it, and from looking at the statistics, the industry's been pretty much doubling every year for the past 5 years when the economy hasn't. So there must be something going on there.
Well, Dan, I'm told that microbrewing, if that's a proper term,
Yes.
is really all the rage these days. And I understand in the San Francisco area there's just a ton of them. I understand up in the Tahoe area they're becoming very popular. So not too strange that, that one of these would take off here in Calaveras County. Dan, I think it's interesting that it wasn't too many years ago that we were saying, did you hear that Bart and Stephen is going to start a winery here in Calaveras County? And now, look, we've got, what, 7 wineries, I think, in the county. Mm-hmm. Do you envision that same kind of thing happening with the microbreweries?
Possibly, yes, because I believe there's a gentleman up in Murphy's, lives in Forest Meadows, who is also trying to put together a microbrewery up Highway 4 someplace. So, yes, somebody had the exact same idea as me, except I happened to beat them to it.
I see, I see.
I don't know that the county could support another brewery, but a brew pub, you know, they're coming around really good.
All right, now, for the information of our viewers, you have your brew out in several restaurants and pubs here in the county right now.
Yes.
Like, for instance?
The Avery Hotel.
Okay.
Lake Alpine Lodge. We've got it in 4 places at this time. Pickle Barrel in Angels Camp,
yes.
Black Bart Inn in San Andreas.
Oh, okay, so you're well represented up and down the hill already.
Yes, and we
Now,
just connected with a local Miller distributor who could probably do a lot better distribution than we can.
I see.
Because we were burning up a lot of time knocking on doors and trying to compete with them to begin with. So this way, they're already there, and they've already had a couple pretty good orders from us, getting it out into like pizza parlors and all the restaurants up and down from Amador to Tuolumne.
All right, now Dan, in a few moments we're going to have you introduce us to your brewmaster, and we're going to learn a lot about the process and about your operation here and so on. But one quick question that comes to my mind as a result of your last comment is, can you brew enough beer here to satisfy the needs if, let's say, all the pubs in the county wanted to stock your brew?
We'd sure try.
You'd try, I see, okay. Well, right now, you offer 3 different kinds of beer, a dark, a red ale, and a light, and as I said, we'll get into that discussion a little bit more in a few minutes. But I want to ask you one other thing on a historical note, Dan, and that is brewing new to Calaveras County?
Well, as a matter of fact, no, it isn't. And we were lucky to be introduced to a local historian, I believe it's Judy Marvin.
Yes, Judy Marvin.
Who works out of the Historical Society, and she did the little summary of the breweries as they came to this area, and they actually go back to the 1840s and 50s, right around the gold rush time. From what the information she gave us was that some of the people weren't all that interested in mining for gold because it wasn't that lucrative for everybody. There were people that had beer making skills, and when they found out they couldn't find gold, they decided to make beer.
Sounds like we had a lot of German immigrants in this area, because obviously the Germans are the famous beer makers going back to the old country. I was interested in hearing that one of the families that was very prominent in the beer making business in those early days was the Hausselt family. And of course that family is still a well-known family in Murphy's to this day. Probably the great-grandsons or great-great-grandsons of Conrad Hausselt, one of the original brewmasters here. Well, Dan, what do you say we go on into the brewery? Let's meet Micah and learn a little bit about what a microbrewery looks like, okay?
Okay.
Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you've just joined the show, we are here at the Murphy's Creek Brewing Company, and we've just had an opportunity to greet and say hi to Dan Ayala, the owner of Murphy's Creek Brewery. And Dan, you're getting ready now to lead us through the process, and there's a young man over here that I want our viewers to meet because he's your head brewmaster, right?
Yes, he is.
Micah, come on in here. Micah Millspa. And Micah, your job is to make all of this stuff run correctly, right?
That's true.
Let's do this. Let's lead our viewers as briefly as we can through the process. First of all, what are the four major ingredients or the four main ingredients to brewing beer?
Well, we have water, of course, and barley malt, and of course the hops, and then yeast.
Let's get a look at this because obviously you hear about the malt and the barley being so important to the making of beer. And in here, I don't know, Paul, if you can get a close-up of this or not, but in here we have three different shades, obviously, of barley. Am I correct in that? And you also use wheat, but we don't have any in here. And each of these shades represents one of the different types of beer that you make. Is that correct?
Actually, these are blended in different combinations to achieve the different beers.
Okay. And you make a dark beer and a red beer and then a light beer. Is that the proper way to say that?
The lightest one is a wheat beer.
Okay.
It's 50% wheat. That gives it a much lighter color and character.
Okay. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the finished product when we get around over there. But obviously, it is interesting to know that that you use this kind of product in the making of beer. Now, you mentioned the water, and I'm curious about one thing. The name of the brewery, Dan, is Murphy's Creek Brewery. Does that have anything to do with the water? Do you use the water from Murphy's Creek?
No, but it's close.
Yes, I know it is. Right across the street. So what is there any particular type of water that you use?
No.
Okay. Okay. Is it distilled? No.
This area's groundwater is ideal for brewing.
Okay.
And we're getting it right from a well on the side of the hill.
Okay, great, great. But is the water important? What is it? Is it Coors that says that it's the water? Isn't that one of their famous lines? And you feel as though that if you're not getting good water, you don't get good beer.
It definitely affects things.
Okay.
So we're fortunate to have an excellent water supply.
Yeah. Well, I know that in Scotland, for example, where they're famous for their single malt liquors, water to them is everything. I mean, they just believe that, for instance, if the water comes right out of the moors, boy, oh boy, that's the best kind of water you can get. So obviously it's the same thing in brewing. Now, we are standing in front of let's see, what is this called, Micah?
This is the hot liquor back.
Hot liquor back. All right.
A fancy hot water heater, basically.
All right. All right. And where does the process begin? Here?
Actually, yeah, it begins here by heating up the water, and everything's heated by a steam generator that we have.
Okay.
And then we have grain. We have a grain mill upstairs.
And we'll get up and take a look at that in a bit.
Okay. The grain is crushed and comes down through this pipe. The thing hinges over into the mash tun where it's blended with the water.
Okay.
Crushed barley and the water are mixed together in here.
Now, Paul can't get a shot of it right now, but maybe he can later. Excuse me, Micah. Let me put this down over here again. But maybe he can later. It looks like you've got in here like a sprinkling system.
Yes, basically. That's for what we call sparging. After the mix of the barley and malt and the water is sit for a period of time, then we do what they call sparging and spray additional hot water over it to wash off the fermentable sugars from the grain to actually make the beer.
I see.
That's where the liquid comes from.
Okay, and then what happens to it after it goes out of here?
It'll be pumped from this vessel into the brew kettle.
The kettle, yes. And the capacity of this kettle is what, Micah?
About 250 gallons.
Okay.
So.
And so that's obviously at this point the max you can brew at one time. Is that right? Okay.
That's our batch size.
Okay. Now, many of our viewers who are beer drinkers are familiar with the kegs that they buy at the store. One of those kegs holds how much?
15.5 gallons, and that is considered a half barrel.
Okay.
The measurement in the industry is a barrel. That is a unit, and it is 31 gallons. So this is a 7-barrel.
Ah, that's what I was getting at.
7-barrel brewery.
Okay.
When we get to the fermenters, they are 7-barrel fermenters.
Okay.
If you look at them, they're basically the same size as the kettle.
Okay.
So when you look at a normal keg that you find any place else in a store, bar, or whatever, that is a half barrel.
Okay.
15.5 gallons.
Now, conceptually, you could be doing this day and night, 250 gallons, one right after the other, and the entire process takes approximately how long?
Our current turnaround's between 10 and 12 days.
Ah, I see, okay.
To finish product or for the brewing process?
Well, how long for the brewing process?
This brewing process is what we call the front end. It's about 5 hours.
Oh, okay.
It takes from the point where we're mashing it until it's pumped out of here into the fermenters.
Okay, so every 5 hours you could have another batch ready to go into the barrels. Is that the idea?
No.
No.
In to be fermented.
And to be fermented. Ah,
It needs to be
okay.
fermented, and that takes a period of time.
Okay, very good. Where do we want to go now, Micah?
I guess we would go into the fermentation room.
Oh, okay. All right.
And this would be the primary fermentation room.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if I seem very happy all of a sudden, it's because we're in the fermenting room here, and obviously there is some gas that emits from the fermenter, and hoo-wee, it's a nice smell in here, Micah. You don't spend a whole lot of time in here, I hope.
Not a whole.
No, good. Now, the fermenter that you're currently using is the one right here behind Dan, and how many gallons is that?
This is, again, 7 barrels.
7 barrels.
This
Oh,
has approximately 210 gallons.
But the one I'm leaning on here that is not yet finished.
This is 800 gallons.
Oh-ho. And that's bye-bye baby then when this one is ready. Is that right?
We'll be using both of them.
I see.
The demand is...
Okay. So obviously you can up your production dramatically. I suppose you've figured out how many times greater. I mean, after all, you're an accountant. So how many times more beer can you put out theoretically in a day with this, Dan?
Well, theoretically, the reason for this is that we could do double or triple batches and ferment them all at the same time.
Okay.
Instead of doing one batch at a time, we can go through the brew process 2 or 3 times, ferment it all at the same time.
I got
and
you.
call it one batch.
All right. Now, this rather odd-looking gadget here, Micah, what is this?
This is a heat exchanger. As the beer comes from the kettle, after it's been boiled for approximately 75 minutes, it's very hot. It needs to be cooled off as rapidly as possible prior to going to ferment. The yeast won't survive high temperatures.
I see.
And so we cool it off through here. It's pumped en route up into this tank. And the yeast is added once this reaches a lower temperature.
So that was going to be my next question. That fourth ingredient that is obviously so critical, the yeast, gets added after this gets cooled down, and it's at that point that it starts to ferment.
Yes.
And we can hear it bubbling in there right now.
It's going.
It's going. All right, and tell me, which particular type of beer are we fermenting right now?
This is the Murphy's Red.
Murphy's Red. Happens to be my favorite, as a matter of fact. Okay, now where do we go?
Where do we go? Well, the beer makes a path through this wall.
Okay.
It's a small door through the wall, but we'll have to walk around.
All right. All right, now, secondary fermentation area. That implies, to me, Micah, that you've determined exactly the right time or precise time that beer has to come out of that primary fermentation area over into here. And how do you determine that?
Well, we determine that by taking a specific gravity reading, that is, checking the density of the beer itself and seeing how far the fermentation has progressed.
Okay.
And when it's reached a point where the majority of fermentation activity is completed, we'll remove the beer to a finishing tank where it can settle out and clear.
Michael, you talked about the finishing tanks, and we have 4 finishing tanks here. And you mentioned that in the primary fermentation tank, It's in there 4 days, correct?
Yes.
And it's in here how many days?
Usually about 6 days.
Usually about 6 days. That varies for some reason or another?
Yeah, it could, as far as production demands go, it could usually go a little bit longer.
All right. Now, that brings up a question that I'd like to ask you right now, because I can remember years ago when I was in the service back in St. Louis, we got a hold of what was called green beer. And now and then you hear people talk about green beer. Does that simply mean people didn't leave it in the fermentation tanks long enough? What does that mean?
Oh, that's generally what that implies, that it's not finished out.
Okay.
We're able to determine whether it's finished out. We're fermenting ales here, which have a shorter turnaround time than most lager beers.
I see.
Take a little bit longer.
I see. All right, now, ale is your red beer, is that right?
They're all actually ales. That's the yeast.
Oh, I got you. All right, all right.
All the beers.
All right. Now, this is a very sophisticated looking piece of equipment here, and Dan, I would hate to have to come up with the money that costs before dinner time this evening, because I suspect that's a very valuable piece of equipment. But what does this piece of equipment do, and why does it look so sophisticated?
Okay, this is actually a filter.
Uh-huh.
We use this to filter the beer prior to kegging, so that it's...
Well, but it's not just a filter. It obviously goes through quite a process there to get out into these pipes so that you can get it into the barrels.
Well, that's all a filter.
That's all there is to it, huh?
No, it mixes diatomaceous earth with the beer in between the two vessels here, and all this plumbing is necessary just to filter the beer out.
Now, wait a minute. I used diatomaceous earth when I had a swimming pool.
This is very similar to a swimming pool filter.
Aha, I see.
Same principle, a little bit more sophisticated.
Okay. You mentioned a moment ago that all of these are ales. All of the beers that you produce here are ales. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, the difference, however, between the black and the red and what I'll call the light ale, for the lack of a better term, Micah, is determined entirely by the malt, by the barley. Is that the idea?
Yes, by the barley.
Okay, so that's what makes the color difference. There is, however, a difference in alcohol content.
Yes, sir.
In each of the one. And how does that run?
Actually, the amounts of malt that are initially used provide more or less fermentable material.
Okay, now I mentioned a moment ago that your red one is the one I really like, and I believe, not because of the fact, Danny, that it contains a little more alcohol, but coincidentally it does, doesn't it?
Yes.
I like it because to me it tastes a little more like English beer. Now, what is there about the properties of that causes it to have 5.1 as opposed to what, 4.0 for the black lager?
It's black gold.
Black gold, yeah.
Actually, the initial process in the brew house, there is more material used in the black gold, the stout, but the materials that are used to make the beer thicker and darker aren't fermentable by the yeast that we're using.
I see.
And so there's less material that's turned into alcohol.
Okay.
More left, it has more flavor in the beer.
Very, very interesting. Very good. I think, Paul, that now it's time for us to go over across the room and show the folks the three different types of beer. But before we do that, before we leave here, I'm curious about one thing. There's a little beaker sitting right here, Dan, and that is really red. And it has a marvelous, marvelous nose to it, as we would say if we were talking about wine. Dan, tell us what this is.
It's a raspberry wheat beer.
Raspberry wheat beer.
And the reason that we're doing this is because Micah has the recipe.
Aha.
And from his own account, it is very popular and is probably one of the best one that is around. There are other breweries that make flavored beers, but he came up with a recipe after working on it, home brewing, that was just excellent, and he decided we might as well do it because nobody else is doing one.
And
on a regular basis or in the area.
Is this going to be a permanent part of your stable, or
It may well be.
depending on how popular it becomes, huh?
We hope to have it out by the 4th of July.
Oh, great, great. Now, do you actually introduce the raspberries, the berries themselves into the process somewhere?
No, it's actually made with a fruit concentrate that's introduced
okay.
when the beer is in the finishing tank.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure exactly when this will air first, but by all means, try a little raspberry beer. It just, the smell of it alone makes you want to say, hey, I got to have some of that. Absolutely wonderful, I'll bet.
And because of, like you said, the nose or the smell bouquet that it puts out, the ladies really favor this type of beer.
Oh, I'll bet.
Because most of them are not beer drinkers to begin with. So when you introduce a product like this, it brings them into the beer drinking fold, so to speak.
There you go, ladies. Raspberry beer just for you, direct from Murphy's Creek Brewery. How about that? Let's go over now and take a look at the three different products and see how they differ in color. Well, Dan, we're looking at a shot of the refrigerator now, and hey, Dan, there's not much beer in there. What's going on?
Well, we just, like I told you earlier, we just signed up with the distributor, and they happened to have been here today, and they took just about everything we had, which is good.
So what you're saying is we better get this shot and get out of here so you can make some more beer.
Well, that's right.
Well, we kiddingly talked earlier about can you supply enough beer for all of the breweries, but obviously if you get into a heavy distribution, you're almost going to have to go to a 24-hour-a-day situation. We're going to have to get Micah some help here. That's all there is to it.
Yeah. I was going to hit on that a little more anyway.
Okay.
We get a lot of traffic up from the Bay Area because they're up here visiting and whatnot, and they want to know if we're going to get down into the valley. And my answer is I would like to see what we need in the immediate area first, if we can supply the needs before we go and expand.
I got you.
We don't want to run out around here. We've got to keep the local people happy.
Right, exactly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're here with the finished product now, and Paul, I hope you can get a shot of those three very distinctly different colored type beers. This far one over here on my right, on the viewer's left, Paul, is called the Black Gold Stout. And Micah, you told us a little bit earlier that to make that stout, you used a heavy amount of that dark
Roasted barley.
Roasted barley, okay. And pretty much that's it with regard to the color, isn't it?
Yeah, this gives the color and a very distinctive taste.
Yeah, it does give it a very distinctive taste, and I dare say that drinking stout is probably like eating avocados. You kind of have to acquire a taste for it, I think. Don't you find that there are people who, if they're stout drinkers, they don't want anything else?
That's very much.
Yeah.
They're very dedicated to stouts.
Okay. Well, it's good for our viewers to know. Now, as I mentioned earlier a couple of times, my favorite, I'm not hinting, Dan, you understand, but we do have to do something with this after we're through shooting, don't we? My favorite, I want you to remember, Dan, is this red one in the middle called Murphy's Red Beer. Now, which barleys do we use for that? Well, you're going to have to get it out where Paul can get a look at it.
Predominantly, we will be using the pale malt and the crystal malt.
Okay.
And the crystal is what gives it the reddish
Oh, really?
to the beer.
Really? Okay. Now, this is strictly wheat over here, the lighter one.
50% wheat, and then the lighter colored malt in the center is the pale barley. It's used 50% pale barley and 50% wheat. And we're using a white winter wheat.
And that's called golden wheat beer. Where do you get the barleys and the wheats? I mean, I know we got a shot of it, the bags earlier, but is there someplace very close here where you can buy them, or do you have to ship them in from some distance? Micah, you mentioned that most of the barley that you use, and I guess the wheat too, is grown here in the Central Valley. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then what happens to it? It has to have some kind of a process done to it.
After it's harvested,
All right.
the barley's malted, and that's done at a malting up in Vancouver, Washington. And that's a process whereby they modify the grain from just raw barley into the barley malt, and make the different modifications to produce different varieties of malt that we can later make.
Okay, so there are no malting places in California, is that right?
There may be some in LA, but there's
none up here.
Nothing up here.
All right, now you mentioned Washington, and that brings us to that fourth important ingredient, and that's hops. Where do you get your hops from?
Our Hops come from Yakima, Washington.
Uh-huh. And predominantly that's Oregon and Washington, I guess, produce most of the hops for the world, I guess, huh?
Yes.
Okay, now when you get the hops, they're all malted and they're processed and ready to go, is that it?
They've already been dried and they're
Yeah.
ready to go.
Okay, great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Murphy's Creek Brewery, we hope you've gotten a good idea today of what it takes to brew beer anywhere. I guess if we're talking about Budweiser, Dan, we just multiply this process times, what, 50 trillion or something like that?
Well, on a scale of, as far as production, barrels output per year, we would be lucky if we could do, say, 1,000 barrels a year, whereas Budweiser is doing how many?
I think their batch size is 1,600 barrel.
Aha.
At the Fairfield plant.
Well, now, per batch, 1,600 barrels. I want to ask you one other thing that people might be able to relate to. There's an ad on TV and radio right now that's running very actively by Samuel Adams. And the gentleman says, who owns Samuel Adams, says that the big breweries brew as much in an hour as he brews in an entire year. Now, is that essentially the kind of relationship that you've got here? I mean, or are you even smaller than that?
Actually, Samuel Adams is a rather large brewery because they're throughout the United States.
Okay.
Their output is in the hundreds of thousands of barrels, whereas, like I said, we might do 1,000 barrels a year.
Ah.
So we are not even a dot.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, I think that tells you very concisely why a microbrewery is called a microbrewery. They are brewing in microbes, but microcosms, I guess we should say. But what you lack in quantity, obviously you feel as though you make up for in quality, right?
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what, having had a little sample of this right now, I got to tell you that I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think you've got a marvelous product. Certainly what we hear around the county tells us that you've got a marvelous product. And from a historical point of view, I'm tickled to death to see brewing coming back into Calaveras County. We've learned today that there was a lot of brewing going on here years ago during the gold rush, and ladies and gentlemen, we have a new gold rush. The Murphy's Creek Brewery and Micah Millspa, I get that last name correct. Thanks for being with us today. And Dan Ayala, congratulations to you. You got a great product here, and nothing but good things for you, we hope.
Thanks, Mearl. Come on back when you can taste it.
Oh, I will. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you endorse and heartily purchase this lovely brew from Murphy's Creek Brewery.